false missile threat in the news, looking in the direction of Hawaii and the increased geopolitical tensions as another government shutdown looms. And we have some Wells Fargo customers singing the blues as they woke up in recent days and saw their bank balance in some cases below zero. These are a number of really interesting events that are taking place at the same time. Welcome to Outside the Box TV. I'm Alex Ansary. It is Sunday, January 21st in the year 2018. I'm going to be covering more news in this new year. But first, before we get into China, Russia, Bitcoin, Hawaii, Wells Fargo, and of course the changes coming to Facebook, take a look at what's going on in London. Now, I've seen various forms of what could be called pyramid worship within our society. Saw it recently in Las Vegas. I'll show you a clip of that as well. You know, why are we so inundated with this symbolism of the all-seeing eye and the pyramid? And then we see certain periods in which it gets more overt and, frankly, in our face. And this is hysterical. Although it's a little bit sad, but it is London, right? When in London, you know, might as well grab your lover and get on, you know, one of the seesaws, you know, with the pyramid. You know, it reminds me of Dallas, Texas in 2012 when I went into the mall and there were kids that were jumping up on this pyramid and sliding down. There's also a lot of really weird mannequins that were in that North Dallas mall as well. So I just want to bring that to your attention before we get into some of the more serious stuff. We've been talking about Facebook over the course of the last year, couple of years, and I'm not the only person that's seen a major reduction in the amount of people that I reach. In fact, we're seeing these new social media algorithms across the board. This is all being done under the guise of quote-unquote fighting fake news. And as I reported throughout 2016, I've seen Facebook firsthand allow bots to post news that for some reason was trending or seen more by people than real human beings with real Facebook accounts. I haven't really seen this come out, right, in the news. So Facebook has taken this public position regarding the new algorithms and authoritative sources. So businesses, for example, that have built up their platform with the help of Facebook, that use Facebook to reach their readers or viewers every single day. Over the course of the last year, it's not just happening to people on the right, it's happening to people on the left as well. It's happening to other pages that are considered non-authoritative, not the mainstream media. Now, it's interesting because we're seeing the same language coming out of YouTube. And so these are the things that are taking place. This is from TechCrunch.com. Facebook is gearing up to prioritize news content by publishers a group of Facebook users have deemed trustworthy. Okay, so consensus reality on what people believe is real. The head of the Facebook newsfeed division said the company surveyed a diverse and representative sample of U.S.-based people and their familiarity and trust in various sources of news. And we'll go now to a clip from Al Jazeera on this story.
Facebook is taking a big chunk of the news out of its news feed, and in so doing, retreating from a crucial part of its business. Having transformed the way billions of people consume and share news online, in some cases the way news organizations produce it, Facebook is junking that approach, replacing news with more content from your friends. Something had to give. Venturing into the news business has brought Facebook revenues, but also a boatload of trouble. The platform has been blamed for the spread of fake news, misinformation, and hateful content online. Spare a thought, though, for news publishers. Many of them have made big changes to their business models to max out on Facebook as a way to get to audiences. They've been left holding the bag. But the platform's founder, Mark Zuckerberg, is batting away his critics. He's saying he's doing right by the people who matter most to him, his users. Our starting point this week is Facebook's Silicon Valley headquarters, Menlo Park, California.
In the words of Mark Zuckerberg, we're making a major change to how we build Facebook. He wrote that the feedback he was getting said that public content, including posts from media, was crowding out the personal moments that lead us to connect more with each other. That marked the beginning of the reining in of the news component in Facebook's news feed to be replaced by more personal fare. Coming when it did in early January, Zuckerberg's note read like a lengthy New Year's resolution.
So it's not a surprise to users of Facebook that the news feed has been tampered with. The thing is, people don't agree on who's been doing the tampering. For years, people have pointed the direction at the CIA. In recent years, the direction has been pointed at Russia. But I think many people have overlooked the possibility of the CIA and Russia working together. It would be highly unlikely, right, that each intelligence service would have their way with Facebook without the other hand knowing what the other hand is doing, so to speak. So that's something to consider in light of this revelation. CIA turncoat could have compromised the United States to Russia.
The arrest last week of a former CIA officer suspected of spying for China exposed one of the most significant intelligence breaches in American history. Sources familiar with the matter tell NBC News that damage is even worse than first reported. The Chinese government penetrated the CIA's method clandestine communication with its spies. It used that knowledge to arrest and execute at least 20 CIA informants. American officials suspect China then shared that information with Russia. Russia is thought to have used it to expose, arrest, and possibly even kill American spies in that country.
There's a number of different factors that has led to the rise of Bitcoin. This particular headline from Coindesk.com, Putin investing crypto trouble as way to avoid Western sanctions. According to the Financial Times, an economic advisor to the president told a government meeting that the cryptocurrency would serve as a useful tool to evade Western government sanctions. That's not the only reason for Bitcoin's rise. There are other reasons as well. It should be noted that many of the Bitcoin mining machines are located in China for some reason. So there's been a lot of argument out there that Bitcoin is stable as a currency because of all the diverse locations in which these mining machines are located. What if China is planning to shut down Bitcoin or cause some sort of a problem in the global Bitcoin marketplace? And see, these are things to consider in light of all the hacking news and the cyber warfare that is on the rise, that is not set to end anytime soon. So if you have all these mining machines that are located in China, and as we'll get into in a little bit, we end up waking up into a global conflict. And there's a lot of Western assets that are basically locked up in the Bitcoin currency. Are those holders of Bitcoin necessarily in that type of a geopolitical crisis or war going to be able to get out their money or exchange it? And what would they be exchanging it for? Would it be exchanged for dollars? Or would they be forced to exchange their Bitcoin winnings to the new global currency and how it's going to be delivered? So there's a reason why a lot of people are concerned that Bitcoin is paving the way for a digital world currency. And if you look at the news, it's not so much about Bitcoin. It's the rise in cryptocurrency, in popularity, in world governments around the world. And that's a sign. We see the federal government talking about creating their own cryptocurrency. We see Russia talking about creating their own cryptocurrency. We see China talking about creating their own currency. Where is all of that going to lead us? And of course, you know, we have to sift through the news and use discernment, because there's a lot of manufactured news and manufactured, what I would call political infighting, that is there to distract the population from the more important stories. And so when we look at things like this so-called government shutdown and all the emotions that are being raised on both
The U.S. government
sides.
has shut down after the Senate failed to pass a bill that would have funded it through February. This is the first time this has happened now in 5 years. We want to break all this down for you. Our Jennifer Dowling is live with what it means for people. Jen?
Jennifer, the shutdown means that hundreds of thousands of federal employees could be furloughed, and some services might not be available starting tomorrow.
The leader is looking to deflect blame.
On the one-year anniversary of President Trump's inauguration, the government shut down at midnight.
This vote should be a no-brainer.
The Senate, including 4 Republicans, voted against moving forward with a short-term spending bill that would have kept everything running through February. Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley weighed in.
And it doesn't address the legal status of our dreamer. It's going to go down because it doesn't address so many issues that are important to America.
Under Barack Obama, we saw the same thing. And when that happened, I knew it was more of the same distraction. It's not that we're not heading towards economic collapse. It's that these government shutdowns are manufactured circuses to engulf the masses in a distractionary show, where these people that people assume are honest politicians, right, are actually more like guild actors that are just going through the motions. You know, the amount of times that we've seen these government shutdowns, and yet we go further into debt with these massive, record-breaking billion-dollar military defense budgets, right? And so now they're just coming out with it. Even though I warned before Trump was the president, and I stated that I was concerned that things would go in a particular direction, not towards American greatness, but China and Russia having a stronger geopolitical position over the United States as we go further into debt, as they access more technology. So we see this, and there's a reason that this is significant. How often do we hear about these alerts of a missile heading towards a U.S. territory? They're telling us that what happened in Hawaii last week, where people got a memo that stated, quote, ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. And they're saying, well, it's true, it wasn't a drill, but it was an accident. Someone on the inside hit the wrong button, and they have since been repositioned, reassigned to other duties. The government apologized. In one of the more recent reports, the governor of Hawaii allegedly waited for 15 minutes or knew for 15 minutes that it was false before making the proper correction. So most people and analysts believe that this is a psychological operation. And there's a number of different ways we can take that. But one of the concerns that I've shared on this channel is that when you inundate people with fear day after day of an impending strike or an attack, a large amount of that population is going to tune out because they don't want to live in fear. It doesn't mean that they aren't living in fear. It doesn't mean that they aren't being propagandized. But it almost seems like that is the goal of the propagandist, to numb people out with an over-reporting on false threats and fears. And see, herein lies the problem with that. What happens when the threat is real? What happens when it's not a drill? And what happens when there's no warning and there's no power? And people are fleeing and saying that a particular something happened. And then people may just assume, well, the power's out, because the power, it goes out quite often. It happens. But on that note, we have seen an increase in unusual power outages, whether it's been caused by space weather, which I also talk about on this channel, or whether it's connected to the government's EMP tests or drills that have been increasingly ongoing in this country. When Top Off 4 took place, which was a terrorism response drill in Portland, but it was really a cover for a war game drill. People thought I was crazy when I said that. Top Off 4, check out my 2007 footage also on this channel. And we're going to get more into this as the video goes on with regards to a potential threat to Oregon. But they've been wargaming for specific scenarios. Those within our government that have access to how foreign governments may respond or plan to respond to activities of our own government. And there are plans for nuclear war that go back many decades, where the plan has been mutual assured destruction, which people view as insane. Insane that world leaders would set up this type of a system to where if a certain moves on the chessboard are played, then it's time for a mass response. But I think it's time that people start to realize that this isn't an accident, nor is it an accident that these technologies have ended up in the hands of these foreign governments. You don't have to do a lot of research to figure out that North Korea didn't get to where it is today. And it wasn't just China and Russia that assisted the North Korean nuclear arsenal. You can find individuals like Donald Rumsfeld that sat on the board of ABB. So all of that and more means that the current development is a manufactured development. As complex and as conspiratorial as that might seem, the evidence is in the history. World War III warning signs, China and U.S. close to conflict, Beijing tests missiles. Nuclear war could be sparked by a massive fallout between China and the United States as tensions between the two nations reach a boiling point amid the North Korean crisis. So we've been inundated with news since Trump came into office regarding Trump putting pressure on China to do something about North Korea. And this is considered news? When even before Donald Trump was running, we already knew about the ties between China and North Korea. We can look at the footage of the Great Games. Even before the current ruler of North Korea stepped in, Kim Jong-un, we have Kim Jong-il sitting with then the head of China, as the North Korean slaves perfected their backflips in, perfect harmony. As we Americans watch this in horror of YouTube, wondering, what if one of them fell and, would they be executed? And so all of this history of the Chinese-North Korean ties have been there. What kind of cognitive dissonance would be required in an individual to remove that from their consciousness and look at the headlines about Donald Trump putting pressure on China and to legitimately believe that Trump is wearing the pants in the economic relationship between the United States and China, just by knowing that we were already on this path before the current political cycle, because some people just got involved recently. We can then come to an awareness that our government has already been hijacked from top to bottom, from Democrats to Republicans, seeing the continuation of this outsourcing of technology and going greater and greater into debt. And so it's beyond me how some people that knew about that and America being for sale, to quote the title of Jerome Corsi's book, how do they go then from that to thinking that things have changed? So what happens then if they do privatize the national monuments and sell them? How was this not already planned with help from the Obama administration? To go from the public parks, first get it out of the hands of the people and have this war on off-the-grid living. Push forward Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030, as some people refer to it now. And then someone else can come in, all that public land, now let's privatize it because it's collateral on the national debt, all that land. Now, I think that's what people are forgetting as they get relaxed and see the Dow going up above 26,000 to its record high. They forget about all the collateral debt based in real assets and resources here in the United States. And because the hammer hasn't dropped yet, and we haven't seen a real depression, we're seeing a massive wave of American refugees. That's essentially why you haven't seen a massive flight, if you will, from mainstream society to people creating their own intentional communities, local currencies, growing their own food, and taking that way of life more seriously instead of something that's a hobby or a weekend warrior-ish. And so those are going to be some intense times if we walk into that. You know, as we talk about Wells Fargo and what's in the news right now. What if the bank accounts were never corrected? What if a foreign military hacks into, I mentioned Bitcoin earlier, and causes a destabilizing situation there? But what about these banks? And does China have the ability to hack our banks? And is China, if you will, already on the inside of our banks? And we talk about certain banks that have gone over to China, Bank of America. We talk about the criminal banking institution HSBC, which has been used for money laundering for cartels and terrorist institutions and groups. And so knowing that that's taking place, and we saw a lot of hacking last year, people's private data, emails, even personal ads. That's right. Was it Plenty of Fish or Matchmaker hacked by China? You got to ask yourself, what would they be doing with that much data? There was a comment that was left that was very, very threatening from someone that I would assume is in China, that's on YouTube or somewhere else in the Western world. And you want to talk about psychological warfare, you know, where people are directing death threats at each other across the sea. You know, I'm not going to read the whole troll comment, but this is the type of stuff that I'm concerned that we're going to see more of. You know, you can take a look at the Chinese military recruitment videos. You know, it's not just North Korea where they're looking up at images of missiles striking the United States. The Chinese population has been groomed for something in the future. But prior to that event, the staged manufactured World War III scenario that I think will erupt in the 2020s, America is still on sale at a discount rate. We could see reports about China holding up the housing market for a number of years in California. I've brought to you a number of reports about increased Chinese delegation activity and trips throughout the United States, Oregon, California, Idaho, Washington, other states. Chinese police training in Leak City, Texas, which is a coastal town. And then as we'll get into tonight, I'm going to show you the map. China training with the U.S. military for disaster response just outside of Astoria, Oregon, which is, right, within a few hours' drive of Portland, Oregon. But more specifically, it's accessible by ship. And see, this ties in with a lot of things that I've been warning my audience about for years. Seems to be a plan to bring the coming conflict home. I don't know how YouTube's going to respond to some of this reporting. The on-demand channel was set up as a backup channel where I could continue to report on these developments and not be censored. And also provide a way for people to chip into my reporting regarding those geopolitical activities. Okay, so we're going to see how things go after this hits the internet and the follow-up videos and reporting that I'm going to do. But I see the way that other people report on these things without context in the alternative media. And I think I've made things clear over the years that I don't see a good guy in this whole mess and what's coming between our own country, Russia, and China. You know, there's something else that's lurking. There's some sort of a plan behind this. The war doesn't need to happen. A lot of people look at things from that perspective, but thus they then go, well, then there's probably not going to be any plan for war. They'll probably end up, you know, breaking bread together and selling off into the distance. I want to work out their differences and stop the wars in the Middle East. If the United States is the #1 military, and some say society and civilization on the planet, first of all, how did 9/11 happen? Or how was it allowed to happen? How are these other countries gaining an advantage on the United States? Why are we reading about the Pentagon's computers being hacked when we have all this evidence of even IBM technology being outsourced from the West into China to help them at the most basic fundamental develop computers and thus everything else as they are seeking to surpass the United States in artificial intelligence, technology, design, robots, and that would include robot workers, and more troubling, Russia and China, robot warriors. This from the New York Times: military shifts focus to threats by Russia and China, not terrorism. So now this is no longer a debate, right? Whether we would see in the post-Donald Trump administration greater geopolitical tensions or healed geopolitical tensions that were primarily blamed only on Obama, Bush, and of course Clinton with his outsourcing of technology to China. And then of course Clinton with the uranium deals to Russia. The article states the U.S. is switching its priority to countering Chinese and Russian military might after almost 2 decades of focusing on the fight against terrorism. Okay, we're going to go now to a clip from Mattis.
The latest sign of American priorities moving on from focusing on Islamist militants.
So we will continue to prosecute the campaign against terrorists that we're engaged in today, but great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security. We face growing threats from revisionist powers as different as China and Russia are from each other.
A spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in the United States said a Cold War mentality and zero-sum game mindset would only lead to conflict and confrontation. The spokesperson also said China adheres to a win-win strategy of opening up towards other nations, seeking global partnership, not dominance. He added that China further stands for democracy in international relations. The aim is to build a new model of global affairs defined as a community with a shared future for mankind. Meanwhile, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov described the new U.S. national defense strategy as confrontational. He rejected U.S. suggestions that China and Russia were undermining international efforts to strengthen global security. President Donald Trump and his administration worry that the U.S. military is feeling the effects of years of budget shortfalls and needs a full reboot. Lavrov suggested that the new strategy reflected a campaign for additional financial resources.
But we recognize no strategy can long survive without necessary funding and the stable, predictable budgets required to defend America in the modern age. Let me be clear, as hard as the last 16 years have been on our military, no enemy in the field has done more to harm the readiness of the U.S. military than the combined impact of the Budget Control Act's defense spending cuts.
In sheer spending terms, the United States military outlay per year is still far more than either China and Russia. Washington spends nearly $600 billion per year on its military, almost 3 times the Chinese and Russian budget combined. Natalie Pang.
And it's important to pay attention to the Chinese spin on things as things build, as you yourself may see for whatever reason. More anti-U.S. troll comments calling for the death of American citizens. My warning for years essentially has been that innocents are going to be blamed for the actions of our government. And why I've been warning in the last few years about blaming innocent people for things that didn't do anything to you just because they're being attacked in the media or by particular personalities, it's bad karma. I see a world where in our lifetimes, the very same atrocities that have been done to others could at some point in our lifetimes be done to some Americans under the same banner or propaganda. Perhaps in a civil unrest situation or a breakdown situation, there could be government agents that are steering particular militia groups to attract people to particular areas or places to be later drone attacked out of existence. How do we know this is possible? We look at the Middle East. We look at people that live in the Middle East that are in some cases recruited and baited into situations they should not be in, only to wind themselves dead. How can someone actually say with a straight face that it can never happen here? I think that we've seen evidence in recent years that they've been practicing their ability to radicalize. And while people are saying, no, that hasn't happened, not only has it been happening, It hasn't been directly like one-sided like they make it out to be in the news, to steer the election. We've had sabotage on social media on different fronts, even outside of politics. All different types of disinformation. I noticed this stuff building with websites like whatdoesitmean.com like 10 years ago, and their fake geopolitical reports mixed with real reports. So I knew whoever was running that site, whether it be in Russia or somewhere else, they knew the truth versus the fiction, and they were spinning, creating false headlines. Aliens stop Obama from starting World War III with Russia. Stuff like that. Often bringing in speculative alien theories about stopping World War III. And so when you have people on different sides, not even realizing that agents of influence using the social media algorithm are part of the organizing and promoting of particular rallies and protests in our country that oftentimes end up with people going to the hospital instead of having an honest, open discussion about the issues that affect all of us in this country. There's a lot of information here. Here's how China's military has been preparing for a war. But before we do that, again, there's been another skirmish, and I don't think these things are accidents, between a U.S. ship and a Chinese ship, and we're seeing an increase in statements from the Chinese military drawing their own red line in the sand.
We hope that the U.S. side respects China's sovereignty and the efforts of the countries within the region. Don't make any trouble out of nothing. The Chinese army will continue to perform its defensive duties, reinforce the patrolling over the sea and air, resolutely protect our country's sovereignty and security, and maintain regional peace and stability.
The PLA, since 2012, stepping up their military training efforts. I've talked about the increase in Chinese military recruiting videos. Turning their modern fighting force capable of conducting long-range power projection operations. In 2013, the Army and paramilitary police planned nearly 40 exercises, 40 training exercises. In the past 2 years, the PLA alone conducted at least 45 exercises a year. Staging those exercises in more complex and harsher conditions on land, sea, and in the air. Along with the modernization of China, which includes a boost to military research and development designed to close the weapons gap with the United States and Russia. Xi has also demanded absolute loyalty and obedience from the party, from the 2.3 million strong PLA and 1.5 million strong People's Armed Police, which was placed under the direct control of the CME this year. Analysts say China's growing economic interests overseas as a result of its Belt and Road Initiative, and also the AIIB. Now, this Belt and Road Initiative is connecting 80 countries across 3 continents, meaning its military will need to be able to protect Chinese projects and workers around the globe. Meanwhile, at home, Chinese politics, the top leadership has targeted pervasive corruption in the PLA that has threatened to undermine China's ability to wage war. The drill that took place back in November in 2017, as they prepare to go to war, more Chinese-U.S. domestic drills on U.S. soil, in this case, my home state, right within 60 miles of my home city, my birth city of Portland, Oregon. U.S.-China participate in disaster management exchange in Portland. Which is just so interesting after we saw the Top-Off 7 drill in 2007 under the guise of fighting terrorism, a war game drill. So they war game with countries that they also do disaster response with. But because people see them doing disaster response drills, they think that the geopolitical tensions somehow are dissipating. And that's what's most alarming about this. So I think for a number of years, through multiple administrations, by design, this is incredibly controversial and even feels dangerous to say, our government has been letting China in through the back door. There's so many examples of this. Fourth Horse Rising, my video on YouTube, watch it if you haven't already. It's a video mashup, not professionally done, but there's a lot more information that needs to go into a follow-up film. We have this report from Fox News, right? This is not fringe media with regards to this source on the Chinese troops. U.S.-Chinese soldiers find common ground in disaster drills. Steve Quell came up recently in the comment section, and Steve Quell and others were behind a number of articles, promoted articles that were seen by millions, countless, about a decade ago. Fake reports, fake news about an imminent Chinese invasion from Mexico. So like websites like whatdoesitmean.com and certain things on the back pages of rinse.com, I've always wondered for years, why do certain fake stories about China and their threat keep being recycled? And over the years, by 2009, 10, 11, when I started looking at the real stuff that other people weren't looking at when they were busy with the fake article about the Mexico border, not saying something can happen in the future, but did they invade in 2000? And so the purpose of them putting out that disinformation, like I said earlier when we were talking about this, and I'm seeing confirmations with what just happened in Hawaii. If people are inundated in the media or the internet or any otherwise with fear and fake news about these governments and countries, the day when it arrives that they actually are threats, a lot of people aren't going to listen. When people start looking for information on the internet, to start looking for the history as to how some of these governments ended up with all these high technologies over the course of several decades. Going from the Communist Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and then going all the way to where we are sitting now in 2018 with the most incredible, atrocious weapons of war that can literally annihilate and bring down the global population. Is that the agenda? How do people that talked about the depopulation agenda years and years ago, that think things have changed now and that our country's on its way to prosperity, why would they filter out their own inner knowing? Why would they not be concerned that what we're seeing now with our current puppet in chief? Why would they be so convinced that the movements taking place right now are not those very movements that can lead us to that particular outcome? People should ask themselves, how did Russia end up with superiority in space? At least it's what we're told. Manning the ISS. And now we're reading stories about China and Russia having dominance on the moon in the future by the 2020s and planned explorations to the planet Mars. So I think that's what the phenomena that people have kind of neglected along the years, Democrats and Republicans, those that lived through the 60s into today, how so much of this global military industrial complex and these different levels of capacity, North Korea, Iran, China, Russia, Pakistan, other countries, to where we would be at this point with so many countries around the world armed to the teeth and in coordination with other countries For years they made fun of people going off the grid. If these events come to fruition, there's going to be a lot of people trying to go off the grid at the same time. And unfortunately for some of them, if it's a crisis, some of them may not be successful getting out of some of those dangerous areas. So they've been laughing for years, and the media has been busy for years, demonizing the person that wants to be alone, away from dangerous areas. And then, of course, it becomes mainstream. 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 And then we enter a Orwellian reality where the independent content creator is encouraged to not speak about such things and to modify our behaviors and to modify our speech in line with the new Orwellian reality. And the fact of the matter is, we've been in that for a while. But it's not just an Orwellian reality that comes from Google or YouTube. It's the peer pressure circles that are around us, that may surround you. Those voices of perceived reason that really ultimately don't sound all that reasonable. You know, you should really drink more. You're spending too much time being aware of those things. You know, if you think about that, you might make it happen. And I remember when someone told me that in Portland with regards to reporting on these things. Now, think about the idea of giving someone that kind of power. You yourself as an individual out of billions of people, by reading things that other millions of people have read and reporting on it, you can help create that. And so when we talk about the dark side of spirituality, that's what we're getting at. When myself and others, and we talk about the deceivers that are out there, you know, don't talk about things that are perceived to be negative. When you start adopting to those superstitious ways of thought, if you give it that kind of power, maybe you can. But I think what people are overlooking, is that the people they think are in charge of our planet, or of when the war begins, it's not the people that they think, or the puppets that are sitting in office. I heard one person say, and I find this to also be a little bit outrageous, but he's been on the deep end for a while with his channel, and how he's changed a lot from liberty-loving, or at least playing that character as an actor perhaps, to wherever he is now. He talked about the possibility that this could be a psyops, the situation in Hawaii, with Donald Trump having knowledge of it to prepare us for war. But he talked about war being almost necessary, and then began to chant that Trump was a genius. Now, some of you may not believe that 9/11 was more than what we were told. But let's just say that you do. But you're on the side of, well, it's good that they staged those attacks because we really needed to get a foothold inside the Middle East. You see at what point, right? At what point do people that think in their own minds that they're independent, when they themselves start acting like they're brainwashed by the elite themselves, or maybe through their own success on YouTube, they think that maybe they're one of the elite themselves. Some sort of a virtual reality fantasy game where just because they're for the current establishment, or just because they voted for the president, they falsely believe that the president is looking out for them, just like what we saw with Barack Obama supporters. And some of them were man enough and woman enough to admit it after Barack Obama was out of office. Some people were able to admit that they were conned. And I would say that the power of suggestion is so great, and ego, and the idea of being right, and the idea of wanting a king to return. You know, I can see it all the time on social media, how individuals will be saying the same thing at the same moment, and they will be following the same stories, and they will be playing into the Democrat versus Republican, Republican versus Democrat talking points that are literally rip and read off the breaking news wire, off CNN, off fake news. But how often do they step back and go, well, we're really passionate about these things, but we really are kind of talking about the same thing? It would be years ago, it seems, that people would ask themselves, are we being distracted from something? What are we being distracted from? What should we be looking at? I want to go back and cover this, though, and close the story regarding China training in Oregon. Okay, so I've talked about the Shanghai routes from Portland to Astoria, which was the #2 crimping story in the crimping game, not the pimping game, but the crimping game where when they built Portland and the Shanghai tunnels, men would end up hijacked, shanghaied, if you will, out to sea to work as slaves on ships. Many of them died. They ended up in Portland, also places like Seattle, Astoria, San Francisco. A lot of money came up from the gold rush. So when I began to connect the dots with a geopolitical threat to Portland, in the event of an invasion on the part of China. It had to do with the access, if you will, the waterways from Astoria to Portland, knowing that back 150 years ago, as I said during the Shanghai days, ships would leave Portland with men that were knocked out, drugged, kidnapped, shanghaied out to sea. And they had a whole criminal network that made sure that the crimping game continued, with a few people having the monopoly. And those crimping mafias, or groups, if you will, forms of organized crime, functioned with the support of the plutocracy, those that actually founded the city of Portland and built the buildings in which the brothels operated. The brothels often used to dupe the men into going into certain rooms, certain places, and in some cases being drugged by the prostitutes. So the reason I bring that up is we still have human trafficking as an issue in our own country. And while people are looking at certain things, I think they're missing the boat as to what can happen if our economy collapses entirely and our nation's defenses are breached. So the vision provided by Leon Legant is something that I think will stand the test of time. It was someone that I interviewed in 2007, beginning then, also in 08 and 11, that since a young child he had dreams or visions of this particular outcome of the Chinese and Russians attacking the United States and arriving on U.S. shores and coming in through the coastline. What I've been monitoring in the non-prophecy world, but the nuts and bolts of facts, things we can prove, things we can cite, things in which there's evidence, is that clearly we've seen multiple decades of outsourcing of technology. We've seen U.S. corporations accessing U.S. technology, Boeing, even moving to the United States like Huawei in Plano, Texas, with a ribbon cutting ceremony on YouTube in 2012 with Rick Perry, tied into our current administration, allowing China in. Huawei, the cell phone company, has long believed to be one that has been engaged in espionage against the American people. Again, why are we being watched? Why is China gathering this information? What is their end game at a top secret level? And so when I see things like this, and I see the distance between this army facility near Astoria, where there's already a history of people being kidnapped by ship leaving Portland, Oregon. I look at the 10 years that I've warned Portland, Oregon, that I believe that it will be the epicenter of a massive human trafficking ring where we would see a new form of white slavery after the defenses are breached. And that this has been the plan for a long time, and it has to do a great deal with why the young is being sexualized. It's far greater than what the critics of Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, and others have taken it. A lot of people have taken it simply to a level of moral decline, and that's about it. And that is significant. You can lead people towards danger by duping them into violent lifestyles, sexual immorality. And we are a human trafficking prostitution society. As I've described Portland, its city's initial industry was based on it. And based on deception to drug those sailors and drug those miners and loggers and kidnap them out to sea. So you've heard this before from others, and I'm going to bring it up again. Those that forget history are doomed to repeat it. There's also something about karma. Karma in particular regions, karma in particular parts of the country, and then karma for the country as a whole. And we have to look at the totality of the immoral things that have been done in our name. And pay attention and not be arrogant when people are propagandized to hate us across the world, like that troll comment. What you need to know about World War III. You could probably find it up on YouTube, a video of mine. That type of thinking from that individual is the type of thinking that comes from a citizen in a society that's been brainwashed and prepped for global conflict. Not only prepped, but to actually seek it, to actually view the death of others as necessary for their own civilization to survive. And this is the war of the worlds that I've been warning about for years. This is the nationalism. This is the kind of stuff that people should be talking about in the independent media. So our last story, we have a story about housing prices collapsing in Portland, or going down 10% as a result of the homeless epidemic. And there's even a recommendation from Coin6 News that if there's homeless outside your house, you may need to get rid of them real fast, or it may result in the decline of your value. The problem is, when are people going to start realizing there's certain factors that are leading to homelessness that are not going away? And until society raises its consciousness to deal with the ongoing homeless epidemic, it's going to continue to see problems within its own society. You know, I learned when I was in San Diego that the homeless epidemic there had actually triggered a epidemic of a form of hepatitis. And you have people that don't have access to proper sanitation, that are basically living like they're in a third world country in the United States. When you have things that bad and people are getting sick and property values are going down, I would say the priorities are not aligned with that which is needed. In Washington, we need people that care about the American people, whether they be veterans, whether they be one political party or another. There should be more opportunity for people to raise themselves out of homelessness and go back to work at a faster rate than what currently exists. We could see it. There's billions of dollars being spent towards the military. And all of these military actions and economic policies are ruining this country. So at some point, people need to realize they've been had by the people of Washington. And at some point, we need to take back our own freedom, our own independence, our own lives, our own thinking, our own spirituality, and our own power. And we are now out of time. Thank you for tuning in. If you're new, subscribe to this video. Also like and share. Till next time, I'm Alex Hanser, reminding you the path to the ultimate truth and place of power still lies within.